Next, we have Dr. Rosalind Picard, Director of Affective Computing Research Group at MIT Media Lab and co-founder of Affectiva, and she's going to deliver a keynote entitled New Technologies for Breakthrough Emotion Measurement. Here we go.
Hey, Jayo. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. I direct research with a group of very smart students at MIT, inventing technology to try to make objective and concrete the measurement of emotional information, whether it's in education or medicine or in helping ourselves with our own family relations. I'd like to start with a story that took place, a personal story, when I was testing some of our technology, and this will give you a little glimpse of what it's like to work with us. When we invent something new, I'm usually one of the first guinea pigs who decides to wear it. And in this case, I was wearing prototype sensors on my right and left wrists and my right and left ankles during an outing at Six Flags. Now, this was not just an ordinary outing at Six Flags. This was one of my son's birthday parties. Now, how many of you have ever planned a birthday party for a child or a loved one, a big event, and it matters a lot to you, right, that the day works out? You might have a little anxiety, oh dear, these key people are sick and it may not show, or the weather may not be good. All these things that can go wrong. Well, fortunately, this day did work out, and I learned some interesting things along the way. One of them, here, I'll just show you some of the data from my day, is, and here the blue line is my left wrist, the red line is my right wrist, and the black and green are the two legs, and I was curious if the signals on these 4 points would be highly correlated over the day. What are these signals? These signals are the skin conductance response. It goes up with sweating, but it also goes up even before you sweat with slight changes in your autonomic arousal, specifically your sympathetic nervous system. Now, Six Flags is exciting, right? So it should go up with rides that excite you, and it should go down with things that are kind of calm or boring, waiting in a long line. And indeed, you see some big peaks here. These first big ones are one of the rides I dreaded that the boys unfortunately wanted to go on, and I have quite a big response there. These other peaks I managed to get them interested in riding the roller coasters. I love roller coasters. So this is my peak on, this big one here, is my peak on the fastest, highest, most intense roller coaster ride in all of New England. And that was a blast, and we did it multiple times. Now, one of the things that surprised me, however, that I learned about myself was that not only did I peak on the biggest, fastest, highest roller coaster in all of New England, but actually the biggest peak of the day was that morning trying to get out the door. Some of you are resonating, I think. Now, one of my smart graduate students pointed out, it's not just that this is the biggest peak of the day. Actually, these are not the biggest peak of the day. It's the right side relative to the left. And this was quite interesting. We usually thought of this measure as a general measure, kind of like you have one heart rate, doesn't matter where you measure it on your body. But it turns out this measure is going to give some slightly different patterns of information depending where we measure it. And we weren't tuned into that when we started this. I'll say more about that later. Now, we didn't build this to measure mom and dad's stress, although it turns out to be quite easy to do that now. We built it originally to understand when you have a non-speaking person, in particular somebody on the autism spectrum was who we were trying to help, who experiences a lot of stress and frustration. And maybe when they get really autonomically overloaded, their heart rate might be 140, their skin conductance might be 10 times the height of yours and mine here, but on the outside, they might look very calm and kind of out of it. Like you might even think you need to wave your hand in front of their face to get them to perk up again. What we discovered was that often what we see on the outside is very different than what's going on the inside. And I'll play just a little bit of a clip here from measuring the skin conductance live streaming here from a therapy session. Now, let me explain what you're looking at here. So there's the video in the upper left of what's going on. Here's a key moment where the girl's getting very agitated. I'm going to turn off the sound. This is a peak moment in her skin conductance. Here's a case where the outward signs match the inward data. What you see in this blue window up here, The right side of this is the two signals of skin conductance, just like they were streaming from me at Six Flags. Here they're streaming from this girl's ankles. She was distracted by the sensors on her wrist. And this is the zoom in of this blue moment right here in the context of a 45-minute occupational therapy session. So one of the things our invention at MIT has enabled us to do is to take data that used to only be measured in doctors' offices or in psychophysiology labs or in psych labs, and now get it as people go through ordinary daily life. We can measure the changes in a child in a classroom setting, in a therapy session, mom and dad at home, whatever the situation is now. And from this, we get a lot of interesting insights that can be customized to an individual. For example, here's where the girl is getting on a swing. She's very aroused getting on the swing. That can be a mixture of emotional arousal, physical, motor planning, and cognitive effort as well. But as soon as she gets on the swing, that rocking motion, her level goes down really nicely. In fact, we've seen for a number of people on the autism spectrum, when they exhibit a periodic rocking, flapping movement, their level sometimes goes down like a slide on the playground. Just an incredible way to regulate one's arousal and calm oneself down. I think it's interesting we're seeing so many more rocking chairs in the airports these days. So what is the skin conductance really measuring? Your autonomic nervous system has three main branches, and the two main ones that are best known, the one that's not shown here is the enteric. The two that are best known are the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, roughly known as the fight or flight response and the rest and digest. So all of us up here speaking after lunch, we're competing with your parasympathetic nervous system right now that's regulating digestion. Pretty much every organ of the body gets innervated by both of these systems, except one organ that's not shown here, and that's the skin. The skin gets the pure sympathetic nervous system response. So I'm wearing two of the sensors on my wrist now. These are measuring my skin conductance response throughout this day. That is getting the pure sympathetic nervous system response. Yes, it goes up with fight or flight. It went up quite a bit the other day when I was giving another big presentation and the AV flaked out on me in the middle of it. But it also will go up with things that are positively exciting. It's a little bit ambiguous there. Because we can now measure this, and we developed it to go out in the field in the wild, we are able to get very interesting data that we never saw before. Here is an example on another non-speaking individual. By the way, we were all non-speaking individuals at one time because we were all infants. And here's a baby who is wearing the sensor in a pink sweatband on the ankle there. We see baby is feeding, and the level is moving along kind of nicely here. Baby was relaxing before feeding. Baby's nursing here. And all of a sudden, baby's still nursing, but the level's climbing. We don't know why. Can't ask the baby, and they don't fill out the surveys and return the questionnaires, right? But the baby's level goes up. And at this peak, the baby starts crying. Baby gets bounced then, and the level goes back down. Now, I wish I had heard a burp erupt right then. Then I could guess maybe it was gas pains. This one remains mysterious, but it is known that when an individual, whether they can speak or not and tell you or not, experiences pain, this level goes up. Now, of course, it goes up with some other things too, so it's not a perfect, specific indicator of pain. But in a non-speaking individual, when you see this level go up, it's a red flag that you should look for something that might be causing that change. Once we got out in the wild with these sensors too, again, this was some of our autism work. One Christmas, I'm sitting at home looking at the data, and I see this enormous spike. And I think, oh no, the sensor's not working, right? This is back when we were hand building them. And I look at the data, zoom in before, I zoom in after, and it looks like the data's fine before and after. I'm scratching my head thinking, what on earth could cause this? I can't think of anything. I call up the student who was the big brother of the kid wearing it, and he says, let me look it up. And he looks in his diary, and he looks up that date, and he says, that was 20 minutes before my little brother had a seizure. And I went, wow. So next thing I know, and it's wonderful to be in Boston, I call up Joe Madsen at Children's Hospital. Joe, is it possible there could be a huge sympathetic surge 20 minutes before a seizure? And, by the way, my name's Rosalind Picard. I'm at the MIT Media Lab. And Joe's like, well, probably not before the seizure started in the brain, but maybe before the outward clinical signs. Next thing you know, we've gotten the IRB forms approved. We're in a study Joe's doing in his lab Thousands of hours of data later, we've collected EEG, ECG, the sensor data on both wrists from just under 100 kids. And we have found an incredibly high correlation between when the doctors say the EEG-based seizures are happening and this black data. The red is the doctor looking only at the EEG. The black is data from our sensor showing this huge sympathetic surge. This black data down here, incidentally, is sleep data. I'll say more about that in a moment. We have published these results showing, for example, that the generalized tonic-clonic seizures, the more severe ones that used to be called grand mal, are much more intense in the signal than the complex partials, the ones that used to be called petit mal, the smaller ones. We also have some results coming up soon that I wish I could tell you about right now, but stay tuned if this interests you, that relate the signal to another important biomarker in epilepsy. What most people probably don't realize is that seizure-related consequences actually are estimated to cause more deaths in the U.S. than breast cancer. Breast cancer is certainly better known. Much better PR people on the breast cancer pink ribbon campaigns. But when it comes to deaths, especially unexplained deaths from epilepsy, this is huge. And one of the key biomarkers is the EEG being suppressed after the seizure ends, why it stays suppressed for a long time. So we are now finding very interesting associations between the signals we're picking up in the sympathetic innervation of the skin and the EEG activity. Not something you would think that you could measure the EEG off the wrist, and I'm not claiming we're measuring the EEG off the wrist, but we're finding that different circuits in the brain are giving rise to very specific and interesting patterns that we can pick up very easily now from the wrist. This is a sample of the first data I ever saw 24/7 from skin conductance from a student at MIT, it happened to be, wearing our sensor. So each row is a day, and each row has 24 hours on it. And what you see here is the students labeled this as lab activities, pretty exciting. TV was pretty relaxing here. Sleep has got these bizarre peaks that seem completely counterintuitive, which I'll say more about in a moment. A little bit of relaxing. Studying very intensely here, exam intense. In fact, there's an awful lot of studying for this student and very little social right here. Warn your friends if they're thinking of going to MIT. We've been interested, too, in emotion measurement and market research and learning and engagement, and it was kind of embarrassing as an MIT professor to see the classroom activity is so low. In general, when we've measured audiences during PowerPoint presentations, it goes up with each new speaker, it goes up with laughter, it goes up with live demos, and it has a decaying exponential with just about every extended PowerPoint. We are now in our first clinical trial. This is very exciting to partner with these amazing physicians and help them to get objective data of things they've never seen before when the patient leaves the lab. We have the measurement in the lab, and we have the measurement at home the rest of the day, the rest of the week. And it's amazing what we can see. We can see sleep pattern peaks that relate the sympathetic activation more than 90% of the time to deep sleep. We can see when a person's sympathetic tone related to anxiety or stress is looking kind of normative or really out of whack. We can also see skin temperature drop with certain drug usage that causes vasoconstriction and chilling. We're seeing the patterns that look like seizures in some individuals. It's a rich, new, interesting area to get data now that it's easy to get data and start to relate it to things that we can see going on at home that you can't necessarily see going on in the doctor's office. One more quick story here, and this is one where I'd love to find a partner to do some research on if you're interested in depression or grief recovery. We all, as we get older, we lose our loved ones, and I got really bad news, loss of a loved one at work one day, and for kind of bizarre circumstances, the family wasn't able to get together and grieve as one would ordinarily do. So I was at work being completely useless, and I was actually having a little trouble speaking, not so severe that it was a stroke or something, but I was noticing that Roz, strongly right-handed, was having trouble getting words out. And my colleague, Dr. Rana El-Kalyoubi, smartly said, "Hey, Roz, slap a sensor on both sides." Since I was useless at everything else, I slapped a sensor on both sides. And we ran me through a few tests, and my right side was looking pretty normal, and my left side was practically non-responsive. So once again, these were the homebrew version of the sensor. I swapped the right and left sensor, thinking maybe the left one wasn't working. But still, my right side was looking normal. My left side was suppressed. So I watched that for a while. That night, I was in the kitchen stirring a pot of something in a total funk, and one of my sons comes up to me, and he starts rubbing my back. And it made me feel better. It's like, wow, my son is so caring. This is great. And then one of his little brothers came up to him and started doing the same to him. And I don't know how many of you have sons, but this was a moment of sort of rare parental bliss. I felt kind of happy and tingly down to my toes. And just at that moment, my little one looks up to the display in the kitchen where I happen to be live streaming my data from both wrists. And he says, "Mom, your line's crossed." And I thought, wow, I've read in the literature of brain studies that the two sides can switch relative to positive, negative, and some of these other things, but I never thought I'd get this off the wrists. So we are now, so I measured my sleep, and that's what this data is over the several nights, because I was afraid my day involvement with this hypothesis might have messed it, and I thought maybe I wouldn't mess it up so much during sleep. And sure enough, I find this right-left separation was unusually pervasive during my sleep patterns, and over several days it went back to normal right-left switching during sleep. It switches during sleep stages usually for me and for others we've measured. So we still don't really know what this means, but we're teaming up with a number of top brain scientists to look simultaneously at the brain and the fMRI and with EEG, although the EEG misses the subcortical structures, and we're pretty sure it's going to be subcortical because there are other studies showing that these deeper structures in the brain, especially amygdala, hippocampus, cingulate gyri, have, when you stimulate the right side of them, the right electrodermal response goes up. You stimulate the left goes up. And they have different roles. So if the right amygdala is more associated with threat or anxiety, we would expect to see this right-left shift. So stay tuned for hopefully some more cool findings there. I want to mention one more piece of technology much more briefly before I close here. And that's this very cool new work happening out of my lab with CardioCam. These are technologies we think of as the arousal dimension of emotion. We also do stuff with facial expression that's mostly being used in market research right now and learning. And I can point you to work at Affectiva on that or at the Media Lab if you want. I won't go into that today. But let me mention CardioCam before I close. All right, so in this movie, you see three of my students. The co-inventors on this are Dan McDuff and Ming-Zur Po. And you see heart rates, too, for each of them, one in red, one in black. The one in red is a new algorithm we developed that reads your heart rate using only the light coming off your face measured by an ordinary webcam. The black one is measured with a medical quality finger pulse monitor. Blood volume pulse, it says here. BVP, ICA stands for Independent Components Analysis, the particular algorithm that performed best for this measurement. Ming is shown here with the same webcam and display hidden behind a half-silvered mirror so that you have this very aesthetic experience of not being in front of a computer, but of just checking yourself out in the mirror in the morning. And you see it's finding his face, reading the white light, and recognizing the heart rate and displaying it here. 78, 76, pretty close. Usually what we've been finding is it's within about 4.5 beats per minute on average, 0.95 correlation when a person is moving over 372 pairs that we published in Optics Express originally. And what we're now able to do also is get respiratory rate with a mean error, 0.12 here, and heart rate variability. Those of you interested in the parasympathetic nervous system would find this interesting. So we are now able to get sympathetic from the wrist, parasympathetic from the mirror or the webcam, the regular webcam just built into your MacBook, your PC, your cell phone right now using our custom software. So those are two highlights of technology from our lab. I'll close just with one quick story of the power of what this data can do. This is a story I like of a young woman on the autism spectrum who was giving a 3-minute talk that night, and her biggest peak, of course, is the talk, and she chills out kind of nicely after the talk, except for some bizarre things here that had to do with AV squelching. But before the talk was supposed to start in an event that was supposed to start at 8. But a little bit before 8, they announce that the event is going to be delayed to 8:30. Now, some of us like to have a little bit more time before our talks, but a lot of people on the autism spectrum get very stressed when the schedule changes. So as soon as she heard this, she felt the stress coming on. And then she started pacing, walking back and forth. Now, her friend next to her says to her, and this is evidently going on for a long time, he says, "Stop pacing. That doesn't help." I think it was bothering him. So she stops pacing, and she starts stimming, other repetitive movements. After the event, now they weren't looking at her data live at this point. After the event, sits down, and they both want to see their data from the event. And the first word spoken came from his mouth. He looks at the time, he looks at the data, and he says, looking here at the green section, "I'm not going to tell you to stop pacing anymore." The next morning, I saw them both before another event. She was pacing, and he was just happily typing on his laptop. I don't know how long this has been going on, but I'm now starting to hear lots of stories where when people take the data out of themselves, especially when it has to do with emotions, right? If it's my feelings versus your feelings, maybe you discount them. But when it's something objective we can take out of ourselves and sit down and talk about it, it becomes a whole different conversation. And I think that's an important step toward leading to the kinds of changes we all know need to take place in the healthcare system. So thank you very much, and I hope you'll come find out more.